In this training course, you will learn the hazards that may be encountered in confined spaces. Topics covered include types of confined spaces, hazards of confined spaces, and methods to control confined space hazards. First, you should know, what is a confined space? A confined space is large enough that a person can enter and perform work. A confined space has limited or restricted means for entry or exit, such as tanks, vessels, silos, storage bins, hoppers, vaults, and pits. And a confined space is not designed for continuous occupancy. A permit-required confined space is a confined space that has one or more of the following characteristics: contains or has a potential to contain a hazardous atmosphere, has an internal configuration such that could trap or asphyxiate a person, contains a material that has the potential for engulfing an entrant, or contains any other recognized serious safety or health hazard. Confined space hazards include atmospheric hazards, design or equipment hazards, engulfment or entrapment hazards, chemical exposure hazards, and noise hazards. Hazardous atmospheres can be divided into 4 categories: flammable, asphyxiating, toxic, and corrosive or irritating atmosphere. Flammable atmospheres are caused by enriched oxygen atmospheres, vaporization of flammable liquids, byproducts of work being performed, chemical reactions, concentrations of combustible dust, or a release of chemicals from inner surfaces of the confined space. Sources of toxic atmospheres include manufacturing processes, stored products, material decomposition, and operations performed in the confined space. Examples of irritants are chemicals such as chlorine, ozone, hydrochloric acid, sulfuric acid, nitrogen dioxide, ammonia, and sulfur dioxide. Prolonged exposure at irritant or corrosive concentrations in a confined space may produce little or no evidence of irritation. Asphyxiating atmospheres are caused by a lack of oxygen. Reduction of oxygen in a confined space may be the result of either consumption or displacement. Consumption of oxygen takes place during welding, heating, cutting, and brazing. Chemical reactions, as in the formation of rust, or people working in a confined space. Displacement of oxygen is caused by the buildup of another gas. Examples of gases that may displace air and therefore reduce the oxygen level are helium, argon, and nitrogen. Carbon dioxide may also displace air and can occur naturally in sewers, storage bins, wells, tunnels, vats, and grain elevators. Oxygen deficiency is an extremely dangerous condition. At 17% oxygen concentration, the body reacts by increased breathing volume and accelerated heartbeat. Between 14 and 16%, poor muscular coordination and rapid fatigue occur. Between 6 and 10%, the effects are nausea, vomiting, inability to perform, and unconsciousness. At less than 6%, spasmodic breathing, convulsive movements, and death occurs in minutes. Equipment inside a confined space may also present hazards to your safety. Mechanical equipment can cause crushing, trapping, or amputation. Electrical equipment can cause shock. To ensure your safety, all internal equipment must be locked out and tagged before entry to the space. Thermal or heat-related hazards must be controlled in confined spaces. Factors that influence the interchange of heat between people and their environment are air temperature, air velocity, moisture contained in the air, and the amount of radiant heat. When your body temperature exceeds 102 degrees, you will be prone to heat exhaustion, heat cramps, or heat stroke. Special precautions must be taken in cold environments to prevent frostbite, trench foot, and general hypothermia. Intensified noise in a confined space increases the risk of hearing damage, which could result in temporary or permanent loss of hearing. Noise in a confined space, which may not be loud enough to cause hearing damage, may still disrupt verbal communication with the emergency person on the exterior of the confined space. Engulfment occurs when a person sinks into the material contained in a confined space. Entrapment can occur when a confined space has narrow passages or equipment that restricts movement. Slip and fall hazards can be caused by material residue inside the space, slippery scaffolds or ladders, uneven walking surfaces, openings in walking surfaces, poor lighting, or internal trip hazards such as tools and service lines. Exposure to chemicals in a confined space can result from residual material inside the space, type of work being done in the space, or reactions with incompatible chemicals or processes. Routes of entry into your body can be from injection, inhalation, or absorption. Before entry into dangerous confined spaces, an entry permit must be completed and safe entry conditions established. All hazards must be controlled or eliminated. An entry attendant must be posted at the access to the space, and a person's entering must be briefed on all hazards and procedures. Internal physical hazards must be controlled or eliminated before entering a permit-required confined space. All mechanical and electrical equipment must be locked and tagged to prevent inadvertent startup or movement. Before entry, the space should be emptied of all material and fluids. All pipes must be disconnected or blanked off to prevent material from entering the space while it is occupied. Thermal or heat-related hazards must be controlled in confined spaces. Factors that influence the interchange of heat between people and their environment are air temperature, air velocity, moisture contained in the air, and the amount of radiant heat. When your body temperature exceeds 102 degrees, you will be prone to heat exhaustion, heat cramps, or heat stroke. Special precautions must be taken in cold environments to prevent frostbite, trench foot, and general hypothermia. Noises inside a confined space can become amplified. All sources of noise should be isolated if possible. Vibration should be minimized by use of dampers on equipment and anti-vibration gloves for those who use vibrating tools. Engulfment hazards exist if the confined space contains liquid or fine solid substance that can cause death by filling or plugging the respiratory system, or that can exert enough force on the body to cause death by strangulation, constriction, or crushing. All contents of the space must be removed to prevent engulfment. Entrapment can occur in spaces that have narrow or twisting passages. Entry procedures must provide a means to ensure you, your clothing, and other PPE will not get caught. Freedom of movement is required for your safety. Slips, trips, and falls can be prevented by having adequate lighting at entrance and inside the space, using proper entry ladders or scaffolds, eliminating material that creates slippery walking surfaces, and keeping temporary hoses and service lines in the space above waist level. All chemical hazards must be controlled by either eliminating the chemicals and materials in the space if possible, or by using the right personal protective equipment for the specific chemical hazard. Confined spaces may contain numerous hazards. Never enter a confined space unless you know how all hazards are controlled and the emergency procedures for each entry. To enter a permit-required confined space, you must have permission, have a completed entry permit, be properly trained for that confined space, and you must have a supervisor and an entry attendant.